Go ahead, go ahead. All right, so since last class, we would have looking at the different theories, right? And so we would have looked at plural society last week. Plural society is a very important one, which is, I believe it is outdated. And so we would have argued that there are several theories that seeks to explain Caribbean society and culture. We have plural society, plantation society, and economic realization, hybridization, and Marxism. Now, as I said before, you have to do Marxism on your own. Go and read up on Marxism. I've not seen it in the syllabus, to be honest. It's not a part of the syllabus, so I'm not going to teach it. But I've seen where other teachers and other schools have put Marxism there in the in their stuff. Now, plantation society is another theory that seeks to explain uh, Caribbean society. And so Irving Goffman is applied the concept of total institution to slave plantation. And somebody read the point two for me, please, which is this one. A total
A
institution. This
place,
is the definition of total institution. Go ahead for me.
a place of residence and work where a large number of like situated individuals cut off from the wider society for an appreciable period of time together.
Very good. So, in other words, what this scholar is saying is that total institution is where people live together in one place, you work, but you are cut off from the wider society for a very long time. And so, this scholar mentioned that plantation was considered to be very close, right? It closed off from the other parts of the world. So that is just one perspective of the plantation by Goffman, that the plantation was a total institution because it was cut off from, from the world, and also it was closed. Each plantation, so even within the same society where you had different plantations, people tend to be very much to themselves. Plantations were very much to themselves. Because on a plantation, you had everything. You had on a plantation, slave plantation, you had your own hospital, you had your prison, you had your provide your ground provisions. Uh, so it was very much an isolated society. Now, Stanley Elkins said, study American slave plantation, and he argues and he said that American slave plantations were concentration camps. So just like the concentration camps in Germany, where the Germans would have inflicted a lot of pains on the Jewish people, he said that American slave plantations were similar to concentration camp. And Cornelius Ferguson mentioned that plantations were like prison. So if we see right here, what I'm actually doing is to point out where scholars over a long period of time would have applied the concept of plantation in various different ways. One said that it was a total institution. One said that it was like concentration camp. Another scholar said it was like prison. Quite a lot of different stuff. And this is one of my favorite person, Gilbert Frey. Uh, uh, I believe he did a lot of work on Brazil. And he said that the big house completed by the slave represented an entire economic, social, and political system. So the big house he was making reference to was a plantation that this, and you wouldn't find his work in English, his work is predominantly published in Portuguese. And so he said that is the big house, the plantation, everything was surrounded uh, around the plantation, the economic system, the social system, the political system. And Herman Merivale said that plantation sector has a dominant role in West Indian economy. And but if you realize that all of the work that I've discussed previously on plantation, that plantation was a total institution, that plantation was American slave, a concentration camp, that plantations were prison. These were work that dealt directly with American slave plantation. These scholars were discussing American slave plantations, right? And so Merville was one of the first person to mention that Caribbean, the plantation of the Caribbean was very dominant in our economy. We really never need Merville to tell us that, but that was something that he would have contributed to the historiography. Now, another person by the name of Charles Wagley said that the plantation is a dominant feature of Caribbean society. And so these were some of the features of a plantation that would have mentioned. One, that the plantation embraces a distinctive type of society. It was a distinctive type of society. It was very, very different from what is known. Also, that the plantation had rigid class lines. So if you go onto a slave plantation, a British slave plantation, or a Caribbean slave plantation, the class lines were very, very rigid. Perfect example of the rigidity of the Caribbean slave plantation. You had the whites at the top, the colored in the middle, the enslaved people at the top. There were no social mobility. Social mobility means you can move from a lower class to a upper class. The enslaved people were not able to move into this class. Same thing with the colored. They were not able to move. And so what we see here is that, and we completely agree with Charles, that there was rigid class line. And another one is that they had quite a lot of ethnic groups there. So we know for sure that there were more than one, well, two major ethnic groups on the slave plantation in Jamaica. Other Caribbean, other countries had way more ethnic groups, but for our in Jamaica and the Caribbean, Barbados, Grenada, the major ethnic groups on a slave plantation would have been the whites and also the blacks. But even within the white population, and that is not true, because you had quite a lot of Jewish people who lived within the society at the time. And you also had, in the African group, most of the Africans came from several different places. So they were not homogeneous, right? They were very much ethnogeneous when it comes to the Africans also. So there were more than one ethnic groups living on a slave plantation. Now, when it comes to the enslaved people, he mentioned that most of the families were matrifocal and unstable family organization. So the families were very much unstable. And as a result of this, they had weak community structure. They didn't never organize as really as a community. And they had low level of participation or integration. So nothing happened on this plantation structure where people were actually integrated, no major integration taking place on the slave plantation, right? So that is what Charles would have argued. Next person was George Beckford. George Beckford uses the concept of plantation society and economy in a different light. And he mentioned that the Plantation Society theory is also applicable to our Caribbean situation when it comes to our economy. Just like how slave plantations were dependent on North America and Europe, Beckett argues and say that Caribbean societies today are very much in the plantation mode because we are very much dependent today on North America and we are very much dependent on Europe. Anywhere you take it, he said we have some level of dependency. And because we are dependent on North America and Europe for everything, that's the reason why we are underdeveloped. That is what George Beckford argues. And so he said slave societies were dependent on overseas economies such as Europe and North America. Caribbean, they exported raw materials. Europe refined the material. North America provided the food, just like on the slave plantation, where most of the food that feed the enslaved people came from North America, the salt fish, all of these different stuff. Today, if you look at our import bills, most of our food, uh, we buy a lot of our food from North America. Most of our food here, even chicken back. So all the chicken back that you see people buying and they come in boxes, North America it comes from. The saltfish that you eat, all the saltfish that you do with the ackee and saltfish come from North America. The cornflakes, North America. The banana chips come from other parts of the world, but it's North American owned the banana plantation. And so for Beckford, this structure of our economy causes us to be very, very much underdeveloped. It hinders our development and it causes inequality between us and also the developed countries. And so my question is that when we look at the condition of COVID-19 and the Caribbean, it shows that we are very much dependent. Look at our tourism. Nobody in the world or in the Caribbean could imagine that COVID-19 would have affected our tourism sector like that. In fact, we rely significantly on tourism as Caribbean countries. And I'm not just talking about Jamaica, but I'm talking all Caribbean countries. And our economies has been rocked all across, devastated our economy because we are very much dependent on tourism. So we move away from sugar as being the main source to today in our economy, tourism, everybody pushing tourism. And so COVID-19 has highlighted that we are very much dependent and has proved George Beckford to be very, very correct. Another scholar that deals with Caribbean, the plantation economy theory is Lloyd Best. And Best said that, listen, the dependency on the metropole for investment is another reason why we are in the underdevelopment. And the mere fact that the Caribbean has very low level of export. We don't export a lot in the Caribbean. We import everything. We import oil, we import sugar, even sugar. And we had sugar plantations and we import sugar. And so Best argues that we are still in the plantation mode. But one of the things that we need to know about all of these is that we need to, so in your own free time, and I believe, yes, in your own free time, ladies, what I would recommend you to do is to ask yourself this question. Use the theories and ask yourself this question. How is the plantation reflected in modern Caribbean life? Look at how the slave plantation was organized. Look at modern Caribbean life today. Is it that we are still dependent on the North or on Europe, North America and Europe? Is it that we have rigid class line, as what Charles Wagley would argue? Is it that we have a lot of matrifocal families? Is it that our family structures are very unstable? Is it that we have low level of community integration? Is it that we are still in the plantation mode? So ladies, this is it. When we meet on Wednesday, we are going to look at how. So the first thing I'm going to ask you on Wednesday is this question. How is the plantation reflected in modern Caribbean life? And from then we will have our discussion on social stratification. All right, ladies, enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Same to
Thank
you,
you,
sir.
sir. Thank you.
All right.